Welcome to What Drives You with your host, Mike Gourdet. Human solution consultant from Seattle, Washington. It is now time to sit back, buckle up for the show that drives the asking question of what drives you. And now your host, Mike Gourdet.
And welcome to this week's episode of What Drives You, the show about why we do the things we do. Today, we are going to be talking with a photographer who lives a nomadic lifestyle. And then we're going to talk about your feelings and your emotions. I bet you're really excited about that. And then we're going to answer the question of the day. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with our guest, Stanley. And then we will see you in a minute. And thanks again for joining us on today's episode of What Drives You. Today we are talking to Stanley Aryanto of Wild Hunt Photography. Hi, Stanley. How are you today?
The Wicked Hunt Photography.
Oh, Wicked Hunt. I'm sorry. I said Wild Hunt. Wicked Hunt. Wicked Hunt. Get that right.
It's a little bit wild.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I'm doing well today. How you doing, Mike?
Not bad. Not bad at all. So we had a little time to chat about this before we actually started recording. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into your photography?
Yeah, so it's quite funny because looking back, a lot of people kind of got into photography right away, and because of their passion to touch a camera. I touched a camera a long time ago, but I didn't start falling in love with photography until I started traveling. The main reason the main reason why I fall in love with photography was that every time you go on a holiday, we usually just take a photo to document things. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, like, you would look back, try to remember things, and there is two different photos. One of them is a good one and one of the bad one, and you know which one you'd rather have.
Right.
So yeah, when I started working as an engineer, I finally have that disposable income to actually start traveling. I actually didn't like traveling before that. I thought it was a waste of money.
Wow.
But I started traveling, and I just took a whole bunch of photos, and it wasn't until before my trip to Morocco where I realized that I want to kind of push my photography further. I come across this photo of the Milky Way. It was so beautiful. It was like a night stars, and you got the core of the Milky Way over this mountain. And I was like, man, I want to be able to take that photo. I always love the stars, and always feel like when you're out there in the middle of the night, like, you're not alone kind of thing. So once I go onto the trip in Morocco, my friend pointed out the same, like a similar kind of shot. And I was like, yeah, I know, I want to take that photo. So as soon as I got back home, that's what I did. I camera, do how to use this big bulky thing, and that's how I got into photography. Yeah, that's how I fall in love with photography.
All right. And would you say that that's your primary passion?
Yeah, when you say primary passion, I got a lot of passion, so I'm not sure.
I asked that question to everybody, and they all almost always say the same thing. So
yeah, it's I think when when I work as an engineer, I realized that I want a different lifestyle. I want a lifestyle where it will allow me to have more time. And it wasn't until I started working as a business improvement consultant in my company that I realized that I like teaching people and inspiring other people. So when I kind of come across photography, I realized that that's what I want to do. I want to be able to take great photo and help others and inspire other people to take amazing photo, like and fall in love with it, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
So if that is at the moment, that's probably my purpose. Yeah, that is my purpose. But in terms of passion, I love snowboarding. I love a whole bunch of other things. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure you can
All right.
call that a primary thing.
I know, right? It's hard. It's kind of hard sometimes. So what do you think drives that passion for photography? You mentioned teaching, you mentioned traveling.
Mhm.
What do you think drives the photography?
The big thing that drive photography is the fact that you can I guess one thing is that you in photography is that you have to look for the extraordinary in the ordinary things,
Hmm.
and I like that concept. That's in life. I think we all should do that. Look for the extraordinary, because in a lot of cases we get so used with all these privileges that we get, and we kind of take that for granted. But more importantly, photography not only helped me share my journey, inspire others, but mostly helped me to push my exploration a lot further. If you look back, about 5 years ago, I wouldn't have hiked 3 hours at 9 p.m. to the top of the mountain trying to get that, trying to see the Milky Way and the mountain and the aurora and all that stuff.
Uh,
So photography pushed me further to do that, not only to capture that moment and share it, but also to experience it, to actually go there and see it for myself. And usually, I call it the wicked hunt, because for every shot, even for the mundane thing, you need to look for that particular nice perspective. And I believe that's a hunt in itself.
yeah.
And photography is the photo itself. It's not necessarily what I need to get, but to me, it's like the trophy. Like when you go up there, you get to see it. It's like that's enough. But hey, I'm gonna grab this trophy, and that's what photography is to me.
All right. Yeah. Mentioned that my father was a photographer, and we would. I grew up with this camera always clicking in the background.
Hmm.
And I've looked at some of your photography, and it's fantastic and great composition. And I was wondering if you, I think you just mentioned it when you said you actually hunt for the right shot. Is
Yeah.
that what you do instead of just click, 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 click? Do you wait and look and say this is the right shot?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because especially in this social media era, we get really fixated with what other people taken, and
Hmm.
we're just fixated with that perspective. So I live here in a beautiful place in Canadian Rockies, and most of the photo that people taken are the photo that other people have taken. But
Uh,
if you only explore that, another 3 meters to the left or another 3 meters to the right, you will get an entirely unique perspective, more beautiful shot. So I think it's a progression thing. When I started, I used to do that. I used to go click, 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 and kind of look for the composition that I like, and that's how I learned composition. I didn't know what's the rule of third or leading line was until I started to teach these things. But yeah, now it's a different thing, because I usually encourage other photographers to learn how to see.
hmm.
Um, our eyes is the best camera you can get. No other camera can compete with our eye. But for that reason, our eye can focus on the beautiful things straight away. So when you get into a camera, and behind a camera and behind the lens, you kind of need to think about, okay, what is the beautiful part of this, instead of just like click, 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 click.
Right, right.
So I think it's a little bit of both, but yeah, there is a little progression and evolution depending on your photography journey. So yeah.
All right. Well, that sounds awesome. And like I said, the photographs I've seen are just absolutely beautiful, colorful, fantastic composition. So it really suits you. I appreciate you coming on the show today And one of the other things that I do ask my guests is if they have any human behavior questions, like if they see somebody that does something really strange and they go, I wonder what that was about, or anything like that. Do you have any questions for us today?
Yeah, well, actually, I really love that TV show, Lie to Me,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, I would love to, like to hear a little bit more about like micro expression, like maybe like share with us one or two interesting things about micro expression.
All right. So micro expressions. Yeah, that show came out about the time I was um, learning about micro expressions, as a matter of fact, and that's something that was advanced by Paul Ekman. I think you may have heard of him. What a micro expression is a very quick flash of a full expression of an emotion on your face when you're trying to suppress an emotion. It
Okay.
happens really, really fast. I think it's something like 0.25 seconds,
Oh wow.
it's less than a second that it sits on your face, and most people can't even see it. Most people never notice it, and it just passes you by. And the reason why is that as part of our human connection, we have to maintain certain behaviors, which mean we have rules. We have social rules, and some of those rules cover like politeness, what type of small talk we got, and types of things. And so one reason why we might suppress an emotion is that we don't want to show that person that they've said something that we don't like, or because we're trying to be polite. So we try to suppress that emotion. And one of the things about the human being is that suppressing things is like pushing on the corner of a waterbed a lot of times. So you push on the corner and other places rise up. So
Oh.
it flashes onto the face, and it's very brief. And some things that I do often talk about when I talk about micro expressions is there's a lot of misinformation about what a micro expression is, meaning some people will call certain facial actions a micro expression when it's not. For instance, one of the things that we do while we're talking is a lot of times our eyebrows will move.
Oh yeah,
And
I do that all the time.
yeah, those are not micro expressions. Those are illustrators that show that we might be thinking about something, but a lot of people will automatically assume that if we knit our brows like that that's an angry response. And so you have to really know what to look for. A micro expression is a full facial expression, and if somebody flashes an anger micro, it's going to be not only the brows knitting, but there's going to be tightening of the lower lids of the eyes, and there's going to be a glare and some tension around the mouth. So that's one of the drawbacks of some of this being in the general public. And unfortunately, it comes from shows like Lie to Me, where they are illustrating what something is, but you don't have the full context. All you have is the drama context of it in that show. And even though the information is correct, you don't have all the information.
That's great. Because I actually do that a lot when I focusing, and people usually say it's like, why are you so grumpy, or why are you angry? It's like that's really good, because I'm gonna use that now. It's like, you know what, you should read this. It's not an expression. It's just
it's just an illustrator.
it's just an illustrator. That's it. That's the word that I'm gonna use.
Yeah. All right. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, that's good to hear.
Not a problem. I'm happy to do so. Again, thanks for joining me today. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to sign off, and we'll be right back with our normal scheduled segment. So stick around. And again, thanks, Stanley, for being here.
Thank you very much, Mike, for having me here. That was great.
All right. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us and listening to our interview with Stanley. Today, we're going to move on and we're going to talk about emotions and feelings, not in the way you might think. We're going to first think about this for a second. What is an emotion? What is a feeling? Now, typically speaking, we use these words interchangeably. And even though I can ask you what it is, it's difficult to define. We understand it from a physical piece. We understand we all feel these things. We understand we have an idea of what an emotion is. We can label emotions. Uh, but there are distinctions between it from a neuroscience aspect. And let's talk about that for just a second. The emotion or an emotional response is a physiological response based on some form of stimulus. And what I mean by that is we've talked about this throughout the episodes. Is this like the survival brain? So you're in the woods and a bear jumps out of the bushes. I'm not sure why the bear jumps, but the bear jumps out of the bushes. You're immediately confronted with a threat. Your brain takes over. You have fear. You feel fear, and you react. That is an emotional response. Feeling is the subjective conscious understanding of that response. So while you don't have any control, you have the physical sensation of fear, and you may not have control over how you react to that. You have also the conscious feeling of I am afraid or I was afraid, and that's sort of the distinction, the working distinction between emotion and feelings. If you ever cared about that, that's sort of what it is. If you don't care about that, then I'm sorry. I know that that's really awesome because I wondered about that myself. At any rate, this is how an emotional response is. Now, we as humans have a wide variety of emotional responses, and we have complex emotional responses. We've tried to winnow them down into basic responses, and what we've come up with so far is basic universal responses. And what I mean by that is they're simple emotional responses that are cross-cultural. And these are, and again, we have to understand that these are not necessarily the only ones. These are just the ones that have evidence behind them supporting their place in a universal system. And while there's different types, I'm going to go with Paul Ekman, who was one of the first ones to start identifying these based off of Darwin's theories. And that would be basic six. And that's happiness, sadness, fear, surprise, anger, and disgust. Now, there's other ones that have come to light. Some say we have the basic 10. Some will say we only have 4. Some say we have 2. I have my own ideas about some of this stuff, which I'm not going to share with you today. But these are kind of considered the basic emotions, and we can look at these basic emotions and see where all the other types of emotions come from, like irritation is a form of anger. Joy is a form of happiness. So we have then we start to distinguish things with our labeling ability. So here's how an emotional response works. We have what's called an emotional response. We have emotions, we have moods, and from a psychological standpoint, we have disorders. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those. So the emotional response is the physiological response to a stimulus, usually external. That's the way our brain likes it. You know, our brain, like I said in previous episodes, our brain is searching for threats in our environment. And when it detects one and it gets through all of our filters, it enacts the system. And that creates some of this response. And it can create a fear response. It can create an anger response. It can create a sadness because we lost something. It can create happiness because we find pleasure in something. But that's how that works. And these are, generally speaking, quick timed events. They don't last long. Their intensity varies, but the time between the start and the end are not very long. So in the case of the jumping bear in the woods, and we experience this fear response, we have a quick uptake in energy, which is that fear coming up, and then it levels off, and then it drops slowly down the other side as the event goes through time. During this period, during the peak of this period, we have what's called a refractory period, where there is no information that can contradict what's going on available, meaning that I'm not going to hang out and try to figure out why the bear is jumping out of the bush. I'm just going to react. And I talked about this last time, I believe, where I talked about how a survival response will take our executive functioning away, and it makes it difficult for us to make rational decisions because that's not what's necessary in those moments. And it's the same thing when we have any other emotional responses. When we have any other emotional responses, we hit a peak. It's like changing lenses out of different shades so that we can block out information that may take us away from that emotion. And this is easy to talk about, like with anger. When you get angry, it's very difficult for us to focus on something that doesn't inform that anger. So, because we want to keep that emotion going. Now, like I said, in a typical emotional response, there's a time limit. It goes up one side and goes down the other. Now, we have the ability to have emotion where we can carry that longer because of the mind-body connection. I don't know if you've heard of that. I'm pretty sure you have. The mind-body connection is we have our physical self, we have our emotional self, and then we have our thinking self. And so we have thoughts, emotions, and physiology. And each one of these can affect the other. So I can have thoughts that create emotions. I can have emotions that create thoughts. I can have thoughts that create physiology. I can have physiology that creates thoughts, and so on and so forth. So what happens when let's say I get up in the morning, I'm very neutral because I've been doing this a long time. I don't have any feelings one way or another about what I'm doing, but I get up and I kick the end table. And I'm suddenly very angry because I just experienced pain. And that sets the tone for the day. I suddenly have what's called a mood. And that would be irritability. A mood would be something that is longer lasting and maybe less intense, but creates a system of either negative or positive emotional responses throughout my day, or in perceptual cueing. That is what's called a mood. But then we have things like the emotion of love, which is lasting. It lasts a long time, and it's consistently reinforced by these feeling states of the love for whoever, our partner or our pets or whatever it is. And when we have those states, or when we feel those states, those create many events, or emotional events, which include, like, let's say for love, it includes happiness, joy, lust. It can also create possessiveness and jealousy. So we have both positive and negative emotional responses to this emotion called love, which can last years. So so it's not a mood, it's an emotion. And that's what makes this stuff so complicated. Not only does this occur with that, but we can also do it with fear. We can have an emotion of fear that undercurrents everything that we do because of our personality, because of a traumatic events or something, so that we are experiencing life through this emotional state, this constant emotional state of fear. And it's a low level, probably unconscious most of the time, but then we build responses to it. So you can see this, in different ways. People that are risk adverse, people that are angry all the time. That's part of these lasting emotional responses that we do, because we reinforce it with thought processes and even physiological process. And we know that our physiology affects our emotional states and our mental states because of work like Amy Cuddy and some others, which have done. Amy Cuddy is famous for the colloquially termed superhero pose. If you haven't heard that, that's a great thing to look up. So basically what I'm saying is that we have the ability to affect our emotional states through the way we move or stand or sit, as well as the way we think. Now, thinking is a little bit harder because thinking is often modified by the emotional refractory, meaning that if I am an angry person by nature, because I have well, maybe not natural, but I have an emotionally angry life, there's a piece of that looks for things to be angry about because it is self-reinforcing. It's looking for that reinforcement to continue doing that. And that's why some of these things are so difficult to get out of, because we have a lot of evidence that we need to be angry or fearful or whatever it is that is the undercurrent of our lifestyles or our life choices. And not only that, but because our brain is the way it is, it often obfuscates things. That's just a big word for hiding. So a lot of unconscious behaviors that reflect that emotional underpinning are often seen as normal, especially to the person that's experiencing it, or people are used to that type of thing. So one good example of that is sarcasm. Sarcasm is funny, but if you notice, persons that are consistently sarcastic are angry. They have an angry underpinning to their personnel emotional life. And that comes out in this sarcastic wit. And we reinforce that by thinking it's funny. So this is how this gets complicated. So we have the emotional event. We have moods, which are longer periods of emotional event that's created through self-reinforcing behavior. And then we have emotion, which is the same way. And then we have disorders. Disorders are persistent emotional states which create negative feedback, if you will. It creates unhealthy responses. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean that it kind of does. But if I'm an angry person by nature, which is a misnomer, I can eventually, or I can have something called toxic anger syndrome, which is meaning that I have a very persistent anger response that creates unhealthy things, not only internally, but can hurt relationships and things like that. Somebody who has anxiety disorder, which is a mood disorder, they have persistent feelings of anxiousness, worry, things like that, intrusive thoughts. And these all create this system of self-identity, in a sense. We have created this world in ourselves which self-perpetuates. It becomes a disorder. And that's how we define those kind of things psychologically. I know that's really not that clear. And it's complex because it's easy for us to think, well, there are 6 basic emotions and that's it, but that's not how it works. We also have complex emotional reactions too. So I can have the jumping bear jumps out and I'm suddenly afraid, but then I get angry. So I've just doubled down on my emotional responses, and each of those emotional responses creates different ways of behaving or different activities in our system, which includes reactive systems like fight or flight, right? So that's where we get that term fight or flight. We can also have massively complex emotional responses when we have a death in our family, or when we suffer a loss, like maybe we have a bad grade and fail a test, or get in a car accident. Trauma also affects the way these things internalize in our behavior. So I know I've given you a lot to think about, but that's what I wanted to get the distinction down, is that in emotion is what happens physiologically, and feelings are how we represent it in our brains or in our minds and in our thoughts and words. So the next time somebody asks you how you're feeling, that's what they're asking for, a report on your emotional state. So I hope that's helpful. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with our question of the day. See you in a minute. Okay, and our question of the day is more kind of a challenge, and that comes from Jason. And Jason says, what good is this information to me? Well, as I sort of said at the I think the very first one, is that when we can understand where some of these things are happening in our systems, when we can understand a little bit more about how human behavior works, it gives us an opportunity to step back and look at things from a different angle. In a sense, we're able to use our rational functioning brain to insert itself into an emotional response. Again, this does take practice. It's not evident quite quickly as you might think, but let's talk about the idea that let's say you're a bank teller and you have a customer that comes in and wants a deposit, and you tell them that they don't have any money, and they get very upset and they start yelling at you. Now our natural response is to react with that energy level. So when their energy level goes up, our energy level goes up, and however that's translated is determined on how we react. So if I have a fear response, I'm going to act differently than I have if I have an angry response. If I have a happy response, that might be troublesome. But what I'm talking about here is that we react with these upheavals of emotional energy. And then we get involved in, for lack of a better term, a power struggle or a clash. But if you can understand what's going on with that person, you can mentally step back and not have to react to their emotional response. So if that happens, and you can say, well, why would that person be angry? Well, they're probably afraid or guilty or embarrassed, and they don't want to feel that pain. So they use what's called a secondary emotion, and that's anger, in order to get that pain away from them. And where are they placing it? They're placing it on you. That's called projection. So they're taking their hurt or their pain and they're moving it to you. Now, this isn't fair, and it's not comfortable, but if you can understand that, you can not choose to play that game. And you can give them something different, say compassion, which is more helpful in that situation than getting happy or angry, or you know what I mean. That's how this information can help in situations like that. In other situations, this can help us to understand why we might be stuck, or we might be in a rut, right? We get feelings of overthinking. We get into this place where we have too many choices and we can't come down on one. And if we can understand what's driving those responses, we can rationally put boundaries around them, and we can move away from those. And that could be as simple as settling on one decision that I'm going to do this and then do it, or really just understanding that, okay, I'm probably just afraid right now and I need to calm myself down. Because that's the awesome piece about being a human, that as far as we know, we're the only creatures that can really do this. And that is interceding in the survival brain's abilities to overtake our thinking system. Now, it's easier to not do that, and I've talked a little bit about that, I believe. It does take work to be able to do that, but this is where we get the things like courage, bravery, persistence, all these things that we hold as ideals in our cultural mindsets. So that's the question of the day. I hope that helped, Jason. And please, if you have any questions, please send them to me at mike@whatdrivesyou.net, and I will do my best to try and answer them. Again, thanks again to Stanley. Thanks for you guys listening. I appreciate all the feedback and the questions. I hope you got something out of today's show, and I look forward to seeing you next week.